Okay, this video is going to cover the muscles of the lower extremity. We'll be identifying the muscles as well as talking about their functions. When we look at the muscles of the lower extremity, the leg, we're going to look at first the muscles that work the hip joint, followed by the knee joint, and then the ankle joint, and some of the muscles that control the toes. When we look at the muscles of the extremities, it's easier to divide them into compartments based on where they're located and also by their function. So we'll start with the thigh, and we're going to look at the muscles of the hip joint. And we look at the thigh, we divide it into the anterior compartment here. Here's the femur. So the muscles in the front of the femur are going to be on the front of the thigh here. And these are muscles that are generally going to flex the hip joint, which would bring your knee up towards your stomach there, flexion. And some of these muscles, as we'll see, also cross the knee joint in the front, and those would actually straighten the leg or extend the knee this way. We'll come back to that in a little while. We also have muscles in the posterior compartment in the back of the leg. These we call in the thigh, these we call the hamstrings. These are muscles that are going to be located in the back. They're going to extend the hip to straighten out the hip joint, as well as flex the knee. Some of these muscles will also cross the knee joint posteriorly and will flex the knee. And then finally, we have the muscles located in the medial compartment of the leg on the inside here. And these muscles are going to adduct or bring the legs together. So let's take a look at those muscles, and we'll start with the anterior compartment. So as you can see here on the right side of your image, I have isolated these muscles that cross the hip joint anteriorly. We're going to start with the major flexor of the hip. It's this two-part muscle, which we generally consider to be one muscle because they insert together these two muscles right down on the lesser trochanter of the femur. Okay, right about here, lesser trochanter. This muscle, or these two muscles, are called the psoas major, and the iliacus, which comes from the ilium portion of the hip bone, the pelvic bone. And again, together we call them the iliopsoas. So iliacus plus psoas major make the iliopsoas, and that is your primary hip flexor. As you can see down here a little bit below, we do have three additional muscles coming from the pelvis that insert onto the femur or below, and they cross the hip joint anteriorly. These are also going to flex the hip. The first one right here in the middle is called the rectus femoris. This is one of the quadricep muscles, the four quadricep muscles that we're going to look at in the front of the thigh. I have isolated just the rectus femoris at this point because it is the only one of the four that crosses the hip joint anteriorly and controls the hip joint. The other three are a little bit lower down on the femur and only work the knee joint. You can see them over here just to compare them. Okay, there's one, and there's that rectus, and then there's one on the inside and one behind. Anyway, your rectus femoris, moving a little bit medially, we have this long muscle right here. This is called the sartorius muscle. Sartorius. It is also a flexor of the hip, as well as some other functions we'll talk about later. And then finally, laterally, we have a muscle called the tensor fascia lata, which is also called the TFL. And it's a bit of a lateral muscle. You can see it would also aid in abduction of the thigh, but the anterior fibers here would also cross anteriorly and be a hip flexor. Those are the anterior compartment muscles of the thigh. Okay, just one muscle I wanted to show you here on the torso model that we can see that is not really visible on the lower extremity model, the leg model, but it is an important flexor of the hip, is that iliopsoas muscle, which includes the iliacus muscle, which you can see inside here. I removed all the internal organs so you can see it a little bit better. But here is the iliac crest, the top of the ilium. And this muscle coming along the inside of the ilium right here, the iliac fossa, this is called the iliacus muscle. It's going to come down and insert on the femur, lesser trochanter of the femur. And it's joined by, or meets with, this muscle that comes down from the lumbar vertebral column and inserts down onto the femur along with the iliacus. This is called the psoas major, psoas majors, iliacus. Together form the iliopsoas. These are the prime flexors of the hip. You can see them very well in the torso model here. From above was called the iliopsoas muscle, and we can only see the very bottom part of the muscle right here. So that'll be easier to see on the torso models or a diagram. But the other three you can see clearly right here in the front. We have 1, 2, 3 muscles that cross the hip joint anteriorly, and they are right in the middle. We have the rectus femoris muscle, which is one of the quadricep muscles, which will also play a role in the knee. The rectus femoris. Medial to that, we have this long sartorius muscle, the sartorius muscle coming all the way down, this strap-like muscle here. And then a little bit laterally, we have the tensor fascia latae muscle, tensor fascia lata, which has number 18 on it. Rectus femoris, number 20 on your model, and for the sartorius, number 24. Okay, so the sartorius, rectus femoris, tensor fascia lata, and a little portion of the iliopsoas insertion right here.